Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to movie night here aboard the ship on Random Trek. I am your faithful explorer, Captain Christopher Ingle, joined as always by my very smart first officer, the man who helped us crack building the ship. It's Brennan, the mystical Mar. Brennan, how you doing?
It's the stuff dreams are made of.
It is. It
A
is
little
Thunder
bit of
Road.
Humphrey Bogart in there.
A little bit of 100. I'll go with Thunder Road because
Well, and Thunder
anytime we
Road.
can
That's good stuff
Springsteen
too. Yeah.
works for me too. Today we are taking a look at it is the 40th anniversary. Actually, no joke, the day we are recording this. Or it's not the 40th, excuse me, the 39th
39th.
anniversary.
Yes, close.
39th anniversary. It came out July 12th, 1985. We are taking a look at the box office bomb and yet cult classic Explorers.
Yes.
But we're not alone. I wanted to take a look at this with someone who had never seen it. And so I asked the Deanna Troy to my Riker. It's my wife, Lisa Ingle. Hi, honey.
Hi.
I wanted her to join us in on this because it's a lot of fun. And she was a child of the 80s. She was
Yeah.
born in the 70s, but like this is peak time for her. And some of
No,
these
yeah.
actors, I'm sure, come up in other movies that she's seen. So, Lisa, I want to start with you. What was your initial thought when I asked you to watch this film with me?
I had never heard of it before.
Mhm.
So it was like, okay, new movie.
And we'll just jump a tiny bit for you. What are your initial thoughts in like 10 words or less? What did you think of this film?
I thought it was cute.
Hmm. Oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah.
very much. Brennan, how about you? Going into this movie, you and I probably grew up seeing this a little more often.
Yeah. I have not seen this movie in more than 25 years, almost 30 years.
Hmm.
Well, I only remembered a few parts of it. I think I only saw it once growing up. This film came out the year I was born, 1985. And definitely part of that wonderful slate of like family friendly, weird sci-fi movies of the 80s,
Yeah.
which a wonderful time for cinema.
Hmm.
And we'll get into some of the other films that were coming out around this time. But this was like movie magic at its peak, I think.
I agree with you. This was one of those movies that this and two other movies, um, Flight of the Navigator, this
Yes.
and Batteries Not Included,
Ah,
were the
yes.
kind of sci-fi movie that was like on your Saturday afternoon movie or your Sunday afternoon movie on TV on regular. And so I saw this so many times growing up. Um, and but watching it now as an adult was such a treat because it is cute. It is great. This is directed by Joe Dante.
Ah,
This is
yes.
not the first film that we here have reviewed by Mr. Joe Dante,
Bye,
because
Billy. Mm-hmm.
just a few years earlier, we had Gremlins.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe Dante's flavor and flair really kick into this film, and I enjoy it so much. In fact, it was 1 year, just 1 year difference. Um, but again, so many great movies that I grew up again, very much that Joe Dante influence. We'll talk a little bit about Joe Dante and his style in this, of course. But as usual on movie night, I turn the con over to you, Commander.
Thank you. Yes, I'm excited to talk about this because I have such a fondness for movies of this time. Just so much magic, very imaginative films, very interesting and unique. And this is kind of the post ET zeitgeist, to use the word, of sort of that mid 80s where they were trying all kinds of neat and unusual things and having a lot of fun with new forms of special effects. This is in kind of the that post Star Wars era of pushing the boundary with what would be done with early uses of CGI, as well as the classic sort of compositing shots and um, what's the motion control? That's it,
Hmm.
and also some incredible uses of makeup and prosthetics. And we'll get to that in a few. But we'll start as we always do with a sense of when we first came to this film. I first saw it probably 1995 or 1996. I think we rented it. Um, I didn't remember every scene, but there were certain moments that really stood out.
Hmm.
Um, so it probably would have been 10 or 11 when I first saw this, just the right age for that. We'll start with our guest, Lisa. Do you remember the first time you saw this? Well,
Yes, because this
yes,
was just recently.
yeah,
We
I
were
see.
on, we were on, we were away in visiting Iowa, not visiting the birth of Captain Kirk.
Mm,
But we were in Iowa and I was sick. I was sick for a good day or two. And so she came to the hotel and I had put on this movie and she's like, "What are you watching?" And I was like, "Oh, this is what we're watching for Brendan." And she kind of stuck with it. She's like, "Well, are you going to start it over?" So we ended up watching the whole thing together.
hmm I realized just as soon as I asked, do you remember seeing this for the first time that you just saw it?
Yeah.
So, Chris, I'd like to ask you, do you remember the first time seeing this?
I really do. Again, one of those Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon movies. I most remember two things: the kids in the Thunder Road and
Hmm
it flying, but the alien scene in the end, them with the kids and the performance that the aliens do of
hmm
all the voices and the characters in the TV. I remember that distinctly, and the twist ending that occurs too. So I remember those very, very, very vividly. The rest of this, because it does go a little slower, I didn't remember as well. But all those kind of actiony and sci-fi elements, I remember so vividly.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get there in a minute, but the Thunder Road is one of the most iconic designs of a spaceship, I think,
Mhm.
that I can think of in a movie. And I certainly remember that part very, very well.
Well,
Um,
the problem
yeah,
we
go ahead.
have is that I agree with you. I love the Thunder Road. I
Hmm
think about this ship, but it's not one that people remember strictly because of how this movie did.
Yeah,
Because
that's
of the
true.
box office failure of this film, nobody talks about the Thunder Road. Nobody talks about this film. I think only recently Joe Dante had talked about doing a remake of this.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, Now, if I recall correctly, this movie came out a day before Live Aid,
mhm,
one of the biggest concerts in the history of the world. And also, it came out within,
a
I think, a
week,
few days of Back to the Future.
about 9 days. Yeah.
So
How do you fight that?
it kind of got swamped.
It did.
And that's unfortunate because, and I'm glad that people are rediscovering it
Mhm.
now and really giving it the love that it deserves, I think.
Yep.
Well, let's
Yeah.
jump into the story. Well, plot pretty straightforward. These three kids build a spaceship and learn some neat technology,
Mhm.
all the while where they're having these dreams about really neat, new, revolutionary technology. But the story, the reason I mentioned ET further back is this is another one of those suburban kids, probably in Southern California,
Mhm.
going on these crazy adventures. Very Stranger Things. You can see where Stranger Things got a lot of its inspiration. This definitely fits in that category, and it's typical with movies of that era. The kids are running around apparently without their parents having any idea what's going on, which apparently is a lot of kids. That's what they did back in those days.
Mhm.
So we also are dealing with this interesting idea of, in a way, this is a meta movie because there are many references and many images of classic science fiction,
Mhm.
including War of the Worlds, This Island Earth, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And it definitely is borrowing from that, inspired by that kind of 50s sci-fi aesthetic. And so to examine the story, I'll start with you, Chris. What do you think? What are your feelings on the overall story being presented here?
I like the simplicity of it, but there is a small basis in reality of the science fiction that we're talking here.
Mm-hmm.
Because the aliens that we meet, at first they don't fully understand English. They talk in they remind me of Bumblebee from Transformers.
Ah,
They
yeah.
talk in movie lines and quotes and commercials, and that's how they communicate. And the kids figure this out. Eventually they do understand and they start to communicate. But this principle that we as a society, we are transmitting consistently. We've been transmitting since, the earliest 20th century with radio
Yeah.
waves. And that's what's been going out into space in all directions. So it only makes sense. The idea is that more than likely an alien race would find our transmissions before they would find us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love taking that aspect of it and using that as a basis of this story, is meeting these aliens that have a view on us, but that a view is only skewed by what we're sending out.
Yep. And pop culture references left and right.
Well, for
And,
the 80s anyway.
and you know what's really funny though is we speak in those same things.
Mhm.
We have become so inundated with pop culture that we almost, a lot of our personalities are shaped by pop culture,
Mhm.
just like it is with these aliens.
Right.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on the story of this film?
Well, being a child of the 80s myself, I was the latchkey kid. I came home, I was out. I didn't run the streets, don't get me wrong, but, I was part of that generation.
Mm-hmm.
We were out until the lights came on. You know, we learned, I don't know much about the science aspect of it, but the kids being, out without their parents, I get that.
Yeah,
I get that whole aspect, even at a young age.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely part of that.
It was safer back then for that.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't do that now, but back
yeah.
then you could.
Yeah, it's very true. And definitely there, I mean, my dad went back in the 60s. Same thing. It was like,
Right.
where's the kids? I don't know. They're out doing something.
The parents would whistle at the dark and kids would come running.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting sense of freedom.
Right.
We see this a lot in 80s movies with kids, where the
Hmm.
kids have freedom to go anywhere. Look at Goonies. Those kids should never have been in the situations that they were. They were moved around, Gremlins. Billy never should have been, his parents should have been on him the entire time. In movies in the 80s, it was all about the freedom of the teenager. It really was the era in film, the era of the teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Parents never worried about anything. Look at the John Hughes films. How many parents do you honestly remember in John Hughes films? Most of it is teenagers. That's just the way it's run. And this is not much different. Now they're not really, they're preteens, early teens. We actually see more of their parents, which I kind of like. But
That's true.
in the end, they don't do a lot with them. They don't ask questions. They don't do anything. In fact, the only adult in the entire film that really questions them was Charlie Drake, played by Richard Miller. The
Yeah,
only one.
Dick
And,
Miller.
and it's like a quick question, a quick look. We never see anything with him again. There's never any consequences. The kids are just allowed to, pardon the bad pun, be explorers.
Right.
Indeed. And how many of us, let's be real, tried to build a spaceship as kids? I mean,
An
I'm sure there's
imaginary
so
ship?
many kids
Yeah,
who,
we did. I mean, cardboard boxes and
oh, I
trash
certainly
cans
did.
and
Yeah, cardboard
yeah.
boxes and very
Mhm,
Kelvin and Hobbes, the transmogrifier,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
and building things like trying to make our bicycles more high tech looking.
Right.
We all did that. That's part of
We
the
we
fun of being a kid.
my friends and I had, or their parents had this broken down dune buggy that was just kind of the frame and it had the tires and everything. And conveniently enough, that was our Enterprise.
Nice.
Like we
Mhm.
turned it into the Enterprise. That's what we used to do. And we transport and use it as a climbing frame. And, that's what we were as kids. And so the spirit of what these kids are doing is so awesome. They're just being kids. Granted, they're being given advanced knowledge, but what they're doing with it is exactly what you would expect a young kid to do.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's fun that you have Wolfgang, who's the ultimate like computer geek.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, you always knew that one kid who was good with computers, but the rest of us weren't necessarily didn't even have a computer. So,
Well, in those days, what was a computer?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it wasn't even until the like we got the early '80s, like 1984, that you start getting home computers.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my dad actually had his work computer at home, probably in 1988 or 89. It's like nobody had that at the time, really.
Yeah, no, I don't remember having a home computer until the 90s.
So you always knew that one kid who was a computer geek. And it just a lot of fun in terms of the story. And it's a very light story, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not really heavy. It doesn't deal with major issues. Even though it came out during kind of this was during a troubling time in the world, if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, because the Soviet Union was going through some major changes and there was some fear going on. But none of those themes make it into this. This is really a pretty straightforward adventure fun film about just the possibilities of the universe. And I think that it is a very simple story, but I think its simplicity actually is a strength in this case. So let's go and talk about our very small cast of characters. This is a very small film in terms of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
This is a beginning point for
yes,
two of our three
yes, it
actors.
is. So we have Ethan Hawke, River Phoenix, and Jason Preston. And as we've discovered, this was Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix's first film.
Mhm.
But let's start with some of the adults that actually play a role here. So let's just talk really quick. We have to talk about Dick Miller as Charlie Drake.
Mhm.
Dick Miller was a good friend of Joe Dante. He appeared in Gremlins and
And
many other
Gremlins too.
films.
Yep.
And he has one of those memorable faces, one of that craggy, lined face. A great character actor, and he plays, I don't know if he is the sheriff, but he is a helicopter pilot working for the sheriff's department. And what's interesting here is you think he might be an antagonist, but he isn't really. He's got that same childlike wonder that the kids have. And he sees them fly their spaceship, and it fascinates him. And
Mhm.
he's interested in what they're doing. I think he sort of represents the fact that as adults we can still have that sense of wonder. Um, so just really quick, Chris, thoughts on Dick Miller as Charlie Drake?
I think this character's underutilized.
Yeah,
You need okay. I understand in a lot of films we would say you don't always need an antagonist. I would disagree. I think you do need an antagonist. It doesn't have to be the Wicked Witch of the West or Darth Vader, or it doesn't have to be that. But they kind of built him in as to be someone that could be a foil on the planet Earth of what's going on. Think Flight of the Navigator and the scientists and the FBI agents in the future.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that. They were antagonists to the character there. So I really felt that he could have been that, but wasn't. And the simple fact is, once they leave the planet, we don't deal with the character Charlie Drake at all again. You don't really deal with him.
Yeah, I
So
would
I think
agree.
he's
He
I
is
think he's
underutilized.
underutilized, and I feel kind of a waste because Dick Miller plays that really well.
Hmm.
And if that was the direction that he was going to go, that, oh, he was on their side at the end, just curious, and that's fine. But if that's the case, they did not do a good job. So I feel as a character, he's just underutilized and kind of thrown away.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because Dick Miller is such a great character actor.
Hmm.
Yeah, they kind of
And
built him up and then kind of threw him away.
yeah, I agree. And it's unfortunate because this is one of the great 80s character actors.
Hmm.
And I always loved my character actors. So it would have been nice to see more of him.
Right.
We also have to mention we're not really going to examine the character, but an early appearance by Zephyr Cochrane himself, James Cromwell as Mr. Miller.
Took me a couple
That was
times to
pretty funny.
it took me a while to realize that it was James Cromwell. I was hearing the voice, but I was looking at him going, it doesn't look like James Cromwell. I mean, between the glasses and the hair and the accent, there's
Hmm.
all of that. He really got into the character. I doubted myself a couple times, like, this is not James Cromwell. But
I
then
missed it.
I went looking it up and I realized it's James Cromwell. So that was, really nice. And of course, we're always looking for connections with our movies to Star Trek. This is a big one. James Cromwell is a regular appearance. I think four times in TNG, and then of course Zephyr Cochrane.
Yes.
And he's
And
goofy. He's
and
goofy in
speaking of
this.
Star Trek, the next character we have to talk about, it's everyone's favorite holographic doctor, Roderick Picardo,
Hmm.
as Starkiller in that bad sci-fi movie they're watching
Hmm.
at the drive-in, and Whack, the alien, and Whack's father.
Hmm.
So three performances from Ricardo, and it's not just the voice.
Mm-mm.
He is in the prosthetic.
Mhm.
During the 80s, particularly this year, 1985, with Explorers and Legend, Robert Ricardo apparently did a lot of prosthetic
Mhm.
work in this time. So the aliens are very interesting because their look is not at all what you might expect.
Right.
And the idea that they are completely shaped by pop culture from Earth is an interesting idea. Because usually when we think of aliens in sci-fi movies, we think of them as being very advanced, very noble, very evolved. But these are just two kids, as we learn, and the transmissions from Earth, that's how they're able to relate to our human characters. Well, first, we got to talk about the drive-in movie called Star Killer, a reference to George Lucas. It's Robert Picardo in a really bad blonde wig as a intergalactic warrior who, gets the girl, defeats the bad guys. And apparently it's supposed to be a foreign film because it looks like it's badly dubbed into English. And so we got to talk about how fun that sequence was. Lisa, your thoughts on the drive-in movie Star Killer?
I probably should have chuckled watching it, but I was trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
It was okay, it was so badly done, you could tell it was supposed to be a B movie,
Yeah.
but it was like I was I think I was so much more focused on what the kids were doing that I wasn't really paying attention to the movie in the background.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I'll admit right here, my family has made a home movie like that. We did our own spaceship special effects using a lot of tinfoil.
Yeah.
And it just made me laugh because it reminded me of that. But also the idea of badly dubbed Star Wars ripoffs. And apparently, if you research, there were a lot of movies that came out after Star Wars that were basically ripoffs, whether they were American films or foreign language films
Right.
that had this level of cheese.
Oh, I don't
And
doubt it.
I love that they're recreating it for this film. And Robert Picardo as our hero makes me laugh because I'm so used to him as the Doctor. The idea
Well, a lot of
of him
people,
playing this handsome hero is
I think a lot of people
hilarious.
don't realize that he's quite the comedian in himself.
It's true.
He's done so many comedic movies that, and a lot of people don't even realize it.
It's true. Like just recently, friends of the show, John Roca and Steve Morris, covered Total Recall, the original one. Robert Picardo is the robotic taxi cab
Mhm.
in Total Recall. So it's always so funny when he shows up and things. And I might get a chance to meet him in a couple of weeks. So
Oh, that would be amazing.
if I do, I'll have to thank him for Legend, Explorers, and many, many other things he's been in. But Chris, your thoughts on Whack?
I love, first of all, Bob Picardo is a great fixture in here, because he's background, and yet he's so important. He comes in as Whack. He's the dad, which is the twist. The twist to that whole ending, and I love it. He plays it so well. And the thing is that this man is Yale educated.
Mhm.
He got his theater degree from Yale. This guy puts it to use, and we've seen him do fun things before. We know he can sing. We have seen him sing in Star Trek many, 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 many times. Well, I know he could do comedy because I most remember him from Gremlins 2. Poor Mr. Forrester. I
Mhm.
feel bad for him. He was nominated for a Saturn Award for Gremlins 2.
Yeah,
Like this guy has the chops. So I really liked seeing him in Explorers and all these little roles and getting to play it out. But what's really great is that if you don't pay attention, you don't know it's him. And that's what works really well. And I know we'll talk about it, but I think a lot of that too has to be thanked to ILM. The
yes.
the special effects and the makeup work by ILM hide him so well that he gets to play and you forget it's him.
Well,
So he by far is the unspoken hero in this film.
I agree. And playing three roles is pretty fun.
Mhm.
And the makeup, I mean, it must have been quite a ordeal to get that makeup on.
Oh, I
But
would
am I
bet.
the only one who feels like the body language of Whack reminds me of Jim Carrey as the Grinch? Did anyone notice that? I mean,
I did
the
not.
way that he was like posturing and
Mhm.
anyhow, it must have been quite a nightmare to get on, but it's really
Well,
fascinating.
to to put it in financial perspective, this movie had we don't have an exact number, but a 20 to a $25 million budget.
Hmm.
$6 million went straight into all the special effects.
Yeah.
So when a quarter of your budget is just special effects and costumes, and you get the king of special effects in any era lately, uh, I'm so sad this did not do well because it looks great.
Hmm.
And Bob Picardo gets to be who Bob Picardo is because of ILM. You don't get one without the other. I know Bob can act, but being able to hide him behind all of that to allow him to be him, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And we have to give a mention to the makeup artist,
Hmm.
Rob Bottin, who it also did the special effects on The Thing, which are absolutely nauseating. But in 1985, he did two major special effects movies.
Hmm.
He did Explorers and he did Legend. And I think both are amazing, though I would argue that Legend might be some of the best prosthetic makeup we have ever seen in film. But this is good stuff too. This one is definitely more because in The Thing and Legend, the makeup is not quite so fun looking. It's kind of disturbing. This movie, it's going more for a playful sense of creature effects. So now let's jump to our three leads. And begin with Jason Presson as Darren. Now, Jason Presson is not as well known as the other three, but I think Darren represents kind of well, there's an element of his character that is coming from a broken home. And this is a common motif in kind of these 80s films. But Darren, is skeptical at first, but he really becomes kind of a part of the group. And I like how the three kids, their personalities are very distinct. Darren is more of the, trying to be cool kind of kid.
Hmm.
He's got the motorcycle, he's got, all that stuff. And I know that he's the one that I did not remember as well. All the characters, but I think that he adds to it. I don't think that the characters' personalities, other than Wolfgang, are that distinct. I wanted to get your thoughts, Chris, on the character of Darren.
He really takes the role of, I'm not going to say the bully, I'm going to call him the muscle.
Yeah.
Because the other, it takes the other two to kind of bring him in, but he's not the smartest, he's not the most charismatic. He just really comes off to me as, like I said, the muscle. He's the
Mhm.
strong one, he's the brute of the group. He was a little bullyish too to start out, but he does
Mhm.
round them out very well, because you have the nerd, and then you have the awkward
Mhm.
kid who's obsessed with science fiction. So it plays out, but I gotta say, of the three, he's probably the weakest. I don't think he's the one developed a lot. And I don't know if it's because I've seen in the future what Ethan and River can do.
Mhm.
That could be biasing me a little bit.
Yeah, it's an
But he
interesting point.
he really comes out, as the weaker of the three.
Yeah, and it's always funny because to those listening who may be too young to remember, being a nerd wasn't cool back then. Being a nerd was you didn't want to be a nerd back then, but you would sometimes get picked on for being a nerd. And Darren's the one that comes into the basement there and goes, "Oh, what's all this? All these sci-fi books and all these comic books." And you know what's funny about that scene is some of those books are sci-fi books that my dad owns. And I was looking at some of the covers going, "Hey, I know that one." But yeah, Darren is the one that kind of comes in and goes, "What is all this stuff?" And I think nowadays, most kids, you're not afraid to be a nerd nowadays. But back
Right.
then, it was kind of not the cool thing to do.
Right.
And
But I
I don't think it's ever been cool, but it wasn't the thing that you let people know, really.
right. The thing that I think that I would say about Darren is I wouldn't say that he wasn't a bully. He was more a protector because he didn't bully the kids. He protected the one kid rather
Good
than
point.
bully the other
Good
kids.
point.
Because when the one kid was being bullied, he protected him rather than bully the other kids.
Yeah. And definitely he's got that toughness to him, but there is a compassion in there. He might try to pretend that he's not that compassionate,
So he's got
but we
the
see that he
oomph
is.
behind him, but he doesn't purposely stand out in the crowd, you know. He
Yeah.
doesn't purposely go out there and bully the other kids. It was more he was trying to protect the one kid.
Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
and then he didn't want him to follow him around. He didn't want the puppy
It,
dog thing.
yeah. Yeah, and that certainly rings very true, I think. But yeah, no, it's an interesting character because even though he might be the weakest of the three, I think that in order to balance out their group, they definitely have a good balance between the three.
Right.
In terms of they're not all three the same kind of character.
No, not by any means.
Um, and then, of course, we have to talk about Ethan Hawke, and this is rather timely because Inside Out 2 just came out, which I have to brag, my brother-in-law worked on it, and my niece's name is in the production babies. And well, my brother-in-law's name is in the credits too. But Maya Hawke is anxiety, and Maya Hawke is Ethan Hawke's daughter. And now, as for Ethan Hawke himself, I mean, good grief! You look at this guy's resume. You look at the things he's worked on throughout the years. This is incredible. His career, and it all begins with this film. Now, I took it more as the idea that Ben is kind of the leader of the group. in a way. Would you agree with that assessment, Lisa?
I think yes, but he's also the heart
Good point.
because there's something about, and I think he's also raised by his mom. I think he's also from a broken home because you never
Mm,
hear about his dad. His mom's there. You see
yeah,
his mom, but you don't see his dad.
yeah.
I think he's also raised in a broken home, so that's where his heart comes from.
That's a good point. That's an excellent observation. I think that maybe without Ben, I can't imagine that Wolfgang and Darren would get along.
No, I don't think they would.
So he's kind of the glue that holds the group together.
Right.
Mhm.
And
Which
sort of
is
a leader in a way.
right, which is where the heart and the leadership comes from.
It's a good point. And I think Ethan Hawke is, I don't think he's ever given a weak performance in anything that I can think of.
No, I don't think so.
He is consistently delivering quality work. And this is his first film. And I say he does a really good job in this movie.
Mhm.
These kids are believable. I mean,
Right.
you know how sometimes you see movies and you got like a little kid character or a preteen that's really annoying. And you're just like, oh gosh.
And you're like, not so sure I believe that.
Yeah, and he's not one of them. He feels very genuine in this. And I think his, obviously, you always have to have the crush in there.
Right. And it's good
You're
that they
always
made it
going to
for
have that.
him.
Yeah, and it's very much like Elliot and that one blonde girl in E.T.
Yeah.
Kind of this cute little thing going on, and that's kind of fun. And let's see, Chris, what are your thoughts on Ben as character?
He definitely is the heart.
Hmm.
He is the central focus, even though, of course, it's all three of them. He's the one receiving the dreams, the transmissions, the ideas. This is what's coming to him. Um, and we really kind of are watching it through his eyes for the most part.
Very
Um,
true.
and I really like him. He's charming. He's fun. And he's the kind of kid that I was. He loved science fiction. And you see him going to sleep to War of the Worlds. And,
Yeah. Mhm.
like, I get it. I get it. I see it. I like it. So he's a misunderstood kid. I really love that. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a fabulous job and not bad for a first time out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that I don't think they ever would have gone anywhere if they had not been for Ben. I think in a way he's kind of the driving force here. Now, of course, we have to talk about River Phoenix. Many of you may remember from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. In his first film role as Wolfgang Mueller, the prototypical 80s nerd.
Mhm.
This is the era of Data and Goonies. This is the era where every movie had to have the nerdy kid.
Right.
And Wolfgang is that kid here. And he definitely is very much the fact that he's German actually kind of makes sense. Because he's very, a lot of the great German scientists, he's got that kind of feel to him. He's wearing those enormous glasses, and he's a really good computer whiz.
Mhm.
And as you know, the archetype of the nerd did back then, would put together these amazing machines that somehow were able to do things that even the most advanced computer couldn't do in the 80s, but we accept it because it's all good fun. Um, so, so he's sort of the one that is the engineer behind this. He's the one with the technical know-how, and so he completes the group in that sense. I'm going to make a strange comparison here. Ben is Captain Picard. Darren is Worf, and Wolfgang is Geordie LaForge.
I would
That's
have said
kind of the
Data.
connection here.
I would have said Data or even Wesley, but I
But
get
in
it.
terms of being the engineer type,
I would say a
he's
cross
definitely,
between Data and Jordy
yeah.
And
because of the brains.
the
Hmm.
neat thing too is I look at this kid. I did not once see River Phoenix. I'm still looking at a picture of him
Yeah,
right now.
I'm used to
That
the
is not
slimmer.
River Phoenix. I mean, it is, but it's not.
I'm used to the more slim faced River Phoenix. There's this
Yeah.
kid who's still got that round child face.
Mm-hmm.
But
It's that just before puberty, he's getting ready to hit that growth
yeah,
spurt.
He's got a little chubby in his cheeks. Yeah.
yeah, my nephew is doing that right now, and give him a year or two, and he's probably going to end up being taller than my dad,
And
which won't be
this
too
was a
long.
jump start because right after this he gets Stand By Me,
Yes,
which
that's
really
right.
launches his career.
Yeah, another interesting '80s kid film, though. But that one might be a lot darker than this film. We'll get to that at some point. So Wolfgang is comes from a seems like he comes from a pretty good family.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like he has a bazillion siblings. His parents are kind of slightly nuts, but I
But
think he does come from a happy home.
yeah, what parents aren't though?
They
No, it's
love him.
true.
Yeah.
Very true. And of course, I mean, James Cromwell is his slightly bumbling dad, and his mom is like a very German mom type.
Right.
Eat, you need to eat, that kind of mom.
And the dad's constantly working on science,
Yeah,
so
yeah. And so you kind of see where Wolfgang gets it. And to me, I think of the three characters, Wolfgang is the one that stands out the most to me. Maybe it's his look, maybe it's the idea that he's the nerd kid, but he's the character I remembered the most from the first time I saw this film. So Chris, thoughts on Wolfgang?
I really like him, but I do feel there's love from his family, but I think they're so focused in the science that they're clueless to him.
Good point.
So again, this movie is all about kids being able to explore and be kids. But let's face it, when again we look at the 80s movies, parents in the 80s movies were these kids should have been taken away from them.
well, I think in aspect the only one that even thought about leaving a note behind for his parents, because the only parent that actually probably would have realized that they were missing was our kid with the heart,
Ben.
Ben. Yeah,
Yeah, that's right. He was writing out his will.
he left a note for his mom saying, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to be back,
Yeah,
but he was the only one because he knew that she would miss him.
it's a constant theme, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But the '80s theme of the kind of broken home, um, the kind of clueless parents, the very much an '80s thing, which is addressed again and again in many movies of that era. So that's sort of our look at the characters. It's a small cast, um, very simple in that regard. So now I want to talk about the screenplay of the film. Uh, One of the things I find interesting is the structure of this film. Now, maybe it's just me, but the structure is not your conventional movie structure. Um, I think that when we reach the alien spaceship, it does feel to me like it's a bit of a different film. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think that in terms of the way that the story is structured, it doesn't feel like it follows your traditional movie structure. Chris, what are your thoughts on the screenplay and particularly the structure of the film?
Well, I know it's science fiction and this is fantasy and family films, and I get that, but I find it unbelievable in that I want a certain amount of, okay, I can go with this. I understand. Okay, I'll play with this. I know they're aliens. I know, science fiction. Go with that. This doesn't do that. There are points I'm going, especially like when they did all the damage to the town that they did in the spaceship the first run through.
Yeah.
You're telling me that people wouldn't go nuts and go, what the heck happened? What, you
Hmm.
destroyed an entire drive-in with people witnessing,
Hmm.
and only one man is investigating this?
Good
you
point.
know I find it just a little, and again, I think this is the 80s. Again, I'm going to refer to that a lot. This is just a film of the 80s, and that was a common thing back then, is focusing on the kids, and the parents weren't that important, weren't as big a part of the story, and that's fine. But I really would have liked to have seen, like, if for me, his River Phoenix's parents.
Hmm.
I know they're the science ones and they're clueless. That he blew up the breaker and everything. Like, all of this. I love that they don't notice, that they go with it. I
Hmm.
would love at some point that they caught them, and the dad would have been like, "Here, son," and he hands him like a piece or a transistor or something to, like, go
Hmm.
explore. You know what I mean? Like, just a little thing to show that the parents care. And I'm not saying they don't, but it doesn't show.
Yeah. What are
You
your
know, um,
thoughts, though, on the third act when we meet the aliens?
um,
Do you feel that it flows with the story?
I think the mystery of going on and changing the trope of what we know about alien science fiction,
Mm.
because we're expecting the same thing everyone else was. Aliens attack. They're dangerous. We don't know what's going to happen. We very War of the Worlds.
Or they're
Uh,
super enlightened.
yeah, yeah. But
Could go one way or the other, kind
I
of thing.
think I think the characters would have expected the other too.
Yeah, a good point.
Um, the trip through the ship was a little slow.
A little bit, a
It
little
could have
bit.
used a little pickup, because the entire second half of the film almost is this. It's
Hmm.
just in the ship, but we don't get anything else with it. And it's a little bit of a disappointment. I love the concept. I would have loved a little more conversation, a little more time, a little more something to go with it. Um, to play with it. So I don't think it's without flaws. It's got some flaws, but it's an 80s family movie. At the end of the day, you just got to go with it and play with it. And the charm of that is why I come back to this film.
Yeah, that's a good point. Lisa, what are your thoughts on the structure of the film?
Um, I think up until that last section with the aliens, it moves, it flows.
Hmm.
I think he's right about, them tearing up the city and then nobody like trying to figure out what's going on is a
Hmm.
little not quite, it's off.
Hmm.
Yeah, you'd think that they would have tried to figure out, what happened. But and then you get to that last, third where you're going, this doesn't flow quite right.
Yeah, it
It's
does seem
slow, it doesn't.
it seems to come to a bit of a stop. Yeah.
Right. Now, them not them, obviously we've said that these are kids. So them being, you know, younger, they took to our communications a little bit different. That's all well and good. But
Hmm.
the fact that a good portion of the time the kids are running around the ship trying to figure out where they are.
Hmm.
It basically comes to, like you said, a stop.
Mm-hmm.
It takes forever for them to find the aliens. When they finally do find the aliens, it takes them forever to figure out how to communicate with them.
And we started
It,
good at the aliens putting on a show, basically.
Except Wolfgang. Wolfgang figures it out like that.
That's true, he does.
and then you have the song, which is really cute.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then it's pretty much all but over.
Yeah, and then they go back home and not much really happens back at home.
Right. And it's like, wait a minute, that's it?
Mm-hmm. A little bit anticlimactic. So yeah, the structure of this film maybe doesn't 100% work, but it's so charming
It is. It's very, very cute.
that you
It's
really
just
can't complain too much.
right. It's extremely cute. It's just it could have been a better way
Yeah.
but I think maybe they knew what they were up against with the other films that were coming out and the other things that were
Mm,
happening at the time,
good
that they
point.
may have just said, zip zap, let's do
Well,
this and just,
That's an
you
so
know.
interesting story about that. So
so the
Chris,
yeah,
yeah.
there is an interesting story to this. Joe Dante was not happy with this film. The studio knew what was coming. They knew, I think they saw it like a train. They just knew it was coming. So they said, hey, we need to get this out as fast as possible to compete with this. So I want you to rush it, rush the editing, get everything together, and get it out before it's too late. So Joe Dante was not happy with this, but he had no choice and ended up getting stuck at the worst possible time in the summer of that year.
Mhm.
And so this film was rushed. These parts of the story were rushed because he has come out and said before, again, why he wants to redo it is the story that he had would have had about a half an hour more. And there would have been more time to develop and more challenges and more
More of the
things.
spiritual quality to it.
Yeah, but they didn't have that. The studio just
Yeah.
wanted to get a film out, get it to people, and that's that. And so that's the reason why it's rushed the way it is this is a prime example of studio interference.
Yeah, and as good of a film as it is, because let's be clear, this is a good film.
No, it
You
is.
can definitely sense in the editing that it wasn't exactly as well edited as we would have hoped.
It's very rushed and very hacked, and
Mhm.
it just, and I get it, and you enjoy it. There are other aspects that are really great about this, but I see what Joe Dante was talking about and why this was so hard
Yeah,
for him.
it'd be interesting if he could ever do a director's cut. That would be interesting.
I kind of at this point don't want a director's cut. Let's leave that be.
Yeah, a good
Let's let
point.
them redo it in modern times. Imagine what we could do.
Oh, that'd be kind of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the screenplay, in terms of like the dialogue, the kids speak like kids do. There's not really a whole lot of super fancy, sciency, deep philosophical conversations because that's really not what the movie is. But I think as far as the structure, I do think those first two thirds very well put together. I think
Right.
third is a little off, but nonetheless, we love this movie because warts and all, this is our childhood.
Mhm.
Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the themes of the movie. Now, this isn't a very deep movie, per se. So we're not really dealing with a lot of big issues. But one that we talked about, of course, is the broken home aspect. And because we've already discussed that, there's another theme I wanted to talk about, which is the idea of pop culture. The aliens communicate almost entirely in pop culture. Here's one theory, Chris. The aliens are like the Tamarians in Star Trek, only if the Tamarians only spoke in pop culture. Do you sort of see my comparison there?
Temba, his arms wide open.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me interesting for two reasons. One, because as Chris said, we're sending out a lot of stuff, a lot of signals out into space of movies, radio, TV. Kind of makes you wonder what aliens would think of us.
We send our music out too.
Yeah,
Even just our digital, our cell phone conversations, that eventually gets out there in
which
the air.
the movie Contact, which we'll need to get to at some point, Chris,
Mm-hmm.
deals with that in an even bigger way in terms of the signals we're sending out. But the other theme is how much of us as a society, as a culture, are shaped by movies, TV, radio, the internet, digital media, social media. Um, the idea that, even though this is aliens getting all this in explorers, that it's kind of looking at us saying, yeah, we're really very much products of pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on that idea?
Actually, all you have to do is look at the children of today.
Mm,
They
yeah,
spend 90% of their time, well, not 90% of their time, but a good portion of their time on electronics.
yeah,
And I'm
they
not
do.
saying it's the parents' fault because a lot of times it's not.
No?
But how many times do we get fed up when we hand them the electronics? Or
Mm,
they take their electronics as teenagers and they're on it. But most of the time they're on their electronics these days.
yeah,
That's how they learn. That's what they do.
yeah, I'm very glad that my sister and my brother's family, their kids, both my sister's kids and my brother's kids, do not spend a lot of time on screen time. Their parents are very good about saying, okay, you can have a little bit of screen time. But now you need to go outside, or now you need to go play, or now you need to go read, or something like that.
We
Just
did the
to put
best
it
we
down.
could, and it's still now my
Yeah.
kids are like, what are they doing right now?
Well, that's the funny part is none of my nieces and nephews have gotten to teenage years yet. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens then.
Because once they have their own phones, it's,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, but it is an interesting idea because as we see, there are positives and negatives to being
Yes, there is
having this
because
technology.
there's a lot of learning stuff that comes with it, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of negatives that come too.
Like for instance, I know in my case, every morning I read the Bible on my phone. That's a good use of media. Um, but when you sort of get stuck in it,
Right.
and all you can do is spend all day just randomly searching
Mm-hmm.
whatever you can find, there is a lot of great things to be learned on social media. And not just social media, our pop culture has many great lessons for us. There are also many negative things about it.
Pop culture affects us in such a way.
It does.
Imagine if there are extraterrestrials out there and are seeing this, what they think of us, let alone what we go into. When we talk about pop culture in films, not just used in films, but how it becomes a part of our zeitgeist. I'm going to give
Hmm.
you a couple examples. In 1975, when Jaws came out, there was a stark drop in people taking beach vacations
Oh, yeah.
because they were scared of sharks in the water, even
Yeah.
though we know statistically that less than a dozen shark bites happen in the off United States waters every year.
Yeah. It
You
almost
know,
doesn't happen.
so the documentary Super Size Me, when that came out,
Oh,
it took
yeah.
a severe chunk out of McDonald's profits and changed how McDonald's served food, from the end. Bambi, 1942. Bambi comes out. There was a stark drop in people requesting hunting licenses.
Good point.
Like films, occur, and we take that information in and we really apply it in unique and crazy ways. Fight Club. Fight Club comes out, and then all of a sudden there's an uptake in people creating fight clubs.
And they didn't seem to understand the message of the movie. That's the thing.
Right. But these are simple examples of um how life imitates art and how it affects us.
Yeah.
So imagine these kids, and I'm talking the aliens, these kids, this is what they're seeing. What do they think of us? And I would have loved more conversations about that.
Yeah.
You're all about war. You're all about this. You're all about that.
The abyss, if you think
How
about the abyss.
how are you beautiful? How are you wonderful people when you destroy, when you hurt, when asking these deep, dark questions at
Yeah.
the only context you have
Well, you have
is
to
pop
remember
culture.
too, Chris, they were children.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
But I get that, but that makes the point even more adept.
Yeah.
That's even more right there, is that kids take in this information in a complete different way than you or I will. We are
Yeah.
adults. We have experienced, we have context. These
Well,
kids
they
don't.
did bring up the fact that they were war,
Yeah,
that they
a lot
were
of violence.
they did bring up the war. They did bring up the violence.
But
Yeah.
if you were an alien, would you avoid our planet if you saw that?
That's what they were talking about.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's why they didn't want to go down to the planet. That's
Yeah.
why they wanted to bring up special people that were willing to be open-minded.
Yeah. It's kind of like the abyss. James Cameron's still in the abyss.
Hmm.
The movie ends with the possibility of the aliens destroying humanity because of all the violence we commit.
There's another movie we need to add to our list.
But then, I won't spoil it for those who haven't seen it. They discover that we're not all like that. Anyhow, but it is an interesting idea of these alien kids. Which I gotta say, that's actually a really interesting twist. And the idea of alien children. That's an interesting idea.
Seeking out other life forms. Yeah, that
Yeah.
that
But,
that threw me for a loop. I was like, wait a minute. These are the aliens? What
yeah, stealing their dad's car, basically.
yeah, stealing their dad's car.
Going on a joyride. I mean, it's an interesting examination how much pop culture affects us. And but like I said, this is a fairly straightforward film, not a particularly deep film. And yet, I mean, I think that sometimes just good, straightforward adventure film is what you need.
Right.
All right, the music. Jerry Goldsmith, who I tell you, this guy has composed some incredible scores throughout the years.
Boy, we've never mentioned Jerry Goldsmith's
Well,
name on
never,
this show before,
never.
have we?
Yep, including how many Star Trek films did he compose? I'd say like,
5?
yeah, like something like that.
It's 5.
Um, and Jerry Goldsmith yet again gives us a really nice score. I really think the music in this movie is great.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some of those like electronic 80s synthesized sounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's also just a very charming, very beautiful score. And yet again, I have to mention Ridley Scott's film Legend, because Jerry Goldsmith did the score for that too. Arguably his best score he ever wrote, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But this score, it's a very simple score, very straightforward. Maybe not as memorable as some of his other scores, but it fits the mood of the movie very well. Chris, your thoughts on Jerry Goldsmith's score?
It's Jerry Goldsmith. We are so biased
Mm-hmm.
on this show when it comes to Jerry Goldsmith. I mean, besides his work in Star Trek, we've talked about that ad nauseum. This guy just keeps coming up with things, and you're like, "That's Jerry Goldsmith. That's
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Goldsmith." You could almost spin a wheel of films, and just like John Williams, there's a pretty good chance Jerry Goldsmith did the score.
Absolutely.
I really love it, the inquisitive nature of it, and yet the technology aspect, kind of incorporating those notes, I think inspired by Tron. I definitely got a little bit of that vibe from it. Um, I really enjoyed this. His music really adds to it, but again, it's subdued.
Hmm.
It doesn't take over. The reason why you don't think of the score is because it lets the story play
Hmm.
and it just kind of accents it instead of something like Star Trek, where there are certain tones and songs that you know, when
Yeah.
you hit it, that's what it is. This doesn't do that. And that's okay. He knows how to play with it. And I really appreciate it.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on the score here?
I think Chris is right. I think, I d- as far as I can remember, I only remember the one song
Hmm.
because it flows with the movie. It's not in your face.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So,
just there to accent the movie.
yeah, but some scores are meant to be big and like in your face. This
Right.
is meant, as you say, to accent the movie.
It's just there to make hints to make the movie move, you know?
And don't you just love those little moments in the score where somebody gets an idea and you can tell by the music
Right. It's
that they
just
just
there to
got an
hint.
idea.
It just pieces it, you know?
E.T. does that. I remember the great scene in E.T. where
Yeah,
Ethos
but
gets
with
the idea to
E.T.,
phone
you can
home.
hear it. You can feel it because of the music.
That's true, and it's John Williams going like dialing it to 11.
Right.
This is
But
definitely dialed down.
right, this is very different.
Yeah, but I do love those moments where it's like you get this musical cue that's like, ooh,
Yes, but those are
something's
the
about
ones
to
that give you
happen.
goosebumps.
Yeah, good point. Yes, the goosebump moments. And then, of course, we end with the last category, which is the spectacle. And this movie definitely has a lot of interesting uses of special effects. Early CGI, very much that post-Tron world. A lot of the classic, like, compositing shots. And, of course, the prosthetic makeup, which is extraordinary. And model work, and all the classic tools of the trade. To create this, it's a very simple film. But it definitely, in that third act, the visual effects really go big. And usually when we talk visual effects, a lot of people think we mean CGI and special effects, but I would argue that prosthetic work is also the spectacle. And the prosthetics, as I said, are extraordinary here. Um, in a very kind of playful yet brilliant way.
Yes.
Lisa, your thoughts on just the spectacle of the film?
I think, as far as the prosthetics and everything go, they did a beautiful job.
Hmm.
I mean, all of the characters, all three of the characters that they did a beautiful job. I mean, they're very playful, they stand out. The chair that the kids sat in
Abbey
um
Road.
that came to that I don't know if it put him to sleep or whatever it was that got into his mind.
Yeah,
That was absolutely beautiful, the way they did that with the lights and stuff.
yeah, amazing.
Um, just the different rooms that they went into, the way they
Yeah,
did that, the
yeah,
way they set up the different rooms, getting lost in the ship. I mean, that may have taken forever and all that, but
yeah.
even that was really nice.
Is it just me, Chris, or did it have a very Terry Gilliam feel to it?
It was a little
Little,
odd and a
little
little
Brazil,
crazy.
a little bit
Yeah,
Brazil.
little off in the designs, but that was
Although,
okay.
yeah,
I really appreciate actually they were crazy, but yet the set designs, especially for the alien ship, were simplistic.
yeah,
It was very reminiscent to me of Star Trek the original series.
yeah.
These
Good point.
sets these sets, you were left to the imagination. A fog machine here, little ambient music here. You didn't have to do much. And you were, right lighting and everything. And I liked the designs.
And it had a
I like
very industrial look to it. You notice
it
that?
did. It did, but this is an alien ship. We truly don't understand what the purpose was for any of that, and we don't need to.
And they
That's
definitely do not go for the classic 50s sleek spaceship design. This looks like a functional
Mhm.
Right.
station.
And we don't know if they're, what do they call it, organic or not. So,
Mm, yeah. And also we have to make mention of that weird spider thing that comes
yeah,
out
that
and
was
takes a
actually
look at
really
the
cool.
kids. Yeah. It like sniffs the kids and looks at them kind of weird. Like the droid on the door of Jabba's palace.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at them. That's really neat stuff. Really, such a strange and unique vision for an alien spaceship. And then of course the spaceship itself, the Thunder Road, such a fascinatingly odd design, using garbage cans and street signs
Mhm.
And
and
the old
the old tilt-a-whirl. Yeah,
tilt-a-whirl, yes.
yeah. I mean, it just looks like something you would cobble together in a junkyard.
It does, but if there is anything in this that I have a qualm with, it's this ship.
Mm,
I love the idea behind it, using the little tilt-a-whirl, and that makes sense. That's cool. And, but there are some things in it that I go, wait a second. This is my number one gripe with this ship. He brings his computer in there to control the ship, right? They never show any power source to control that, to turn on that computer. It's a
They
for the
simple
did.
thing. I didn't see batteries. I didn't see solar
Actually,
panels.
there is a car battery that they put
Is
in
there
the
a
ship.
car battery? There's no
It's
way
on
there's
the
no.
back.
Yeah, they got. There's actually a
Okay.
scene where you see them open the hood of the car.
I must have missed it. But I'm telling you, logistically, a car battery could do some amazing things. It's not running a computer. I'm telling you now. All the things they did, it's just a little wonky.
He
But
he
Yeah,
again,
actually he actually explains how the car battery would run it.
so it's 80s sci-fi though.
yeah,
So
yeah.
at
I
the end
mean,
of the day, you just go, okay,
yeah,
and you go with it, and it's
and
fine.
and there is that sort of tectone babble of kids in the 80s.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm impressed with what these kids did.
Yeah,
I mean, these are kids, young preteen kids who built this thing. That's impressive.
yeah. I mean, I think that this is just one of those films that the spectacle is just so charming. It's such a charming film on many levels.
Right.
Particularly the look of it is very charming. The visual effects are really neat. And like I said, this is movie magic.
Oh yeah.
That's what this is. Which is just the 80s was just such a time for movie magic.
Mhm.
Oh
And
yeah.
you know, this is just a great fun film that's definitely in the spirit of that era and represents kind of what that era is to us, looking back on it nowadays. But that kind of brings us to the end of the discussion of Joe Dante's Explorers. Um, I turn it back over to you, Captain.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. I'm really happy that I watched it again. It really did bring back a lot of my childhood memories of watching this film on a weekend afternoon, and I'm glad that we got to watch it. And Lisa, I want to get your final thoughts on this as our guest. What did you think of this film, especially since it was your first time?
I can't wait to watch it again to catch the things I missed.
Yeah,
This is one I would show with my kids.
Yeah,
yeah,
I want to watch so I can catch the things I missed, and then I got to watch it again to watch it with the kids to see what they think.
I love
hmm
how clean, and this is a clean film. This is very real PG, not
It's
80s PG.
yeah, exactly. I was going to bring that up because if you watch when we did our review of ET, I'm rewatching it, going, boy, they use some words that I would not want to hear kids use. This time, I don't think they hardly do it at all.
I don't
Goonies
think they did it
Goonies
at
is the
all.
same way,
Yeah,
it's very
Goonies, and
yeah.
this movie is definitely more than actual PG.
Yeah.
I think it's G.
It is a PG movie. I know that for a fact. It is PG. Um Actually, let me look real fast. I am curious what why did they give it the PG? I am
Violence
curious.
and rude language, I don't know.
Probably the violent the but well, I
But
don't
there's not
know.
really even any violence. I mean, there's the kids
That
getting beat up.
I don't think there's any violence. I don't remember there
I
being
mean,
any
there's
violence.
the kid beating up on Ben, but that's about
Yeah,
it.
Yeah,
but
no,
that's
let me
about it.
I'm on IMDb really quick and usually they say why it got its rating. There it is.
But I think you're absolutely right about eight. When we think 80s PG, we go, it still has a lot of stuff that you wouldn't want to show kids today.
But I
This
didn't
movie is
hear,
not like that.
and I didn't hear any language. I don't
Yeah, I
remember
think
any
somebody
language.
took the Lord's name in vain like once.
And that might have been
But
it.
yeah, otherwise,
There it
this is
is.
a clean film.
Mild a language, action, and a brief scene involving beer.
Oh,
The
that's true.
beer.
They're
The
drinking the
kids
beer.
drink the beer. The kids drink the
Yeah,
beer.
that is definitely a sign that you're watching an 80s movie. It's kids drinking alcoholic beverages.
Yeah.
But
I'll go with
regardless, it's a mild film.
yeah.
Yes, it's extremely mild.
Especially compared to some of the other 80s kids films.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree too. This was enjoyable. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I definitely will watch this again with my kids, and it's a good nostalgic trick or
Very
trip.
much so.
And I recommend. I don't normally do this, but I recommend that if you did see this, if you liked it, please check this out and the other two that I mentioned too. Batteries Not Included. Highly recommend it. Watch that film. And then what was the third one I said? Oh, Flight of the Navigator.
Now, those
Yes.
two I remember.
Oh, yes.
These three together, it's such different films, but they're all fair. Flight of the Nav or not Flight of the Navigator. Batteries Not Included is a little more mature, but again, it was one of
But it
those
is
that I.
super cute.
It's
Yeah.
one that in the future we will talk about. We'll have it on
And
our list down the
and
line.
it's interesting you mentioned Flight of the Navigator
Hmm.
because the computer voiced, of course, by the late Pee Wee Herman,
Hmm.
Paul Rubens, is
Yep.
similar to the aliens in Explorers,
Right.
if you think about it.
Pop culture references and oh yeah, yeah. But again, all three of those movies were watched in exactly the same way,
No,
Saturday,
yes.
Sunday afternoon
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I highly recommend it. So please check those out. And we will, I'm sure, review some of those films in the
I have to
future.
admit, I have not seen Batteries Not Included,
You've
so
never, oh, that's on the
Oh,
so
list.
we do need to add
On
that to our
the
list.
and it
list.
is so cute.
And here's the thing, it was going to be just a quick derivation, I guess. It was going to be in Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories. Steven Spielberg produced this,
Oh, yes.
but he liked it so much that said, "No, I think this should be a full feature film."
And Batteries
And
Not
it
Included was
was.
directed by, is that
I
like
don't
Ron Howard or it
No, it wasn't Ron Howard, although you'd think it was.
was like
Uh
Robert Zemeckis or one of those guys.
because I think it was Zemeckis, but no, I know the reason why you're thinking of that. Cocoon.
Yes. Cocoon also came out this year.
That's why you're thinking that is it has that same kind of feel. It was directed by Matthew Robbins.
That's right. And he went to USC with George Lucas.
Yes,
So
and
it's
he
all part of that group.
also directed Amazing Stories, and yeah, he was connected in that group.
So
He
all
didn't do a
part of
lot of
that
directing,
kind of 70s filmmaker
and was
group.
also the writer, one of the writers on that. Again, a movie we will talk about it in the
Yeah.
future.
It
But
was the director was Matthew Robbins.
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, he was actually I think he was even in some of the classes with George Lucas.
but last thing about this
Oh.
film, about that film, and then again, we'll talk more about it in the future. Screenplay, an early draft written by Mr. Brad Bird.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, Brad Bird was on that team.
Nice.
So moving
Very
along,
nice.
but let me tell you, you've never seen this movie. If you're a fan at all of Cocoon, If you ever
I
liked
actually haven't
Cocoon,
seen Cocoon all the way
never.
through.
Oh, Brennan.
I know I'm disappointing you.
80s sci-fi was my thing. Like every 80s
Speaking
sci-fi
of
movie.
another movie to add to our list.
Cocoon and Cocoon 2, both of them. Gotta have both. Anyway, a long story short, in the future, maybe around the holidays, I'll add Batteries Not Included to our
Yeah,
watch
and we
along
have to add
list.
Cocoon.
And Cocoon, yes, because it's Cocoon.
We
Anyway,
need to make our list of what we're going to do after the summer. Right?
we'll figure it out. We'll decide.
Yes.
But I'm very happy to have Lisa along. This has been nice to actually watch a movie with her because I often will watch movies without her and I get in trouble for it. So this was nice. It's great to have her along, and of course, in the future we'll have her along here. So Brennan, back to our regularly scheduled programs, right?
Indeed.
Next week we are taking a look at Enterprise, and then the week after we will be recording our look at The Last Starfighter, which is the
Hmm
40th anniversary for The Last Starfighter. And I'm really excited because what happens when you mix Tron with Star Trek? No, that's what my dad told me as a kid. What happens when you mix Tron with Star Trek?
And the
You
music
get the
band.
last, you get the Last Starfighter.
And the music band because of Robert Preston.
Oh, and this was his last film too.
It was. That's sad.
I cry. But Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on X at Brennan Mystical. You can find me on Threads and Instagram at Brennan Blue. And you can find this podcast on YouTube on Page Turners They Were Not. Also on Apple, Google, and Spotify.
And you can find me on Twitch and Twitter at CIngle1984. But as always, we end every episode, kapla, and live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.